the Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson, and today I'm going to welcome co-host Dr. Emma to the show. Welcome, Emma.
Hi, Rebecca. Hi, Jemma.
I'm so excited that Dr. Emma is co-hosting with me today because today we are talking to Dr. Jemma. That's what I'm just going to call you, Dr. Jemma today. Jemma was on once before, and we talked about Anna of Denmark. And today we're going to talk about her royal wardrobe, essentially, and what it tells us about her. So, Jemma, I'm so excited to talk about this because this is really a subject that we haven't covered on the podcast before. And
Right.
right.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to kind of dive into it a little bit. Dr. Emma's here because this is, also her specialty area and not mine. So I'm just going to lead off and let Emma take it. But let's just kind of start off and talk about one of the things that I noticed in the article. I'm just going to jump right into this. That kind of surprised me was when you had mentioned, and it's not an article, I guess it's a chapter, isn't it? Anyway, I digress. One of the things that you mentioned was how when Anna of Denmark came over here, where am I? Geez, what day of the week is it? I don't even know.
Rebecca.
I think my mind is in
Yeah.
Scotland.
None of us are in Scotland or England right now.
No,
So,
we are wishing we would be there. It would be
Yes.
nice to be there.
Yeah.
it was
But we're
agreed.
not.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, when Anna of Denmark came to Scotland, she brought a carriage with her. Carriage, is that the right word? I don't even know. I was surprised by that. Can we talk a little bit about that to start off with? Like, how do you even go about bringing one over on a ship?
So, yeah. And thank you so much for having me back. I loved talking with you last time, whenever that was, several months ago now. So I'm thrilled to be back talking more about Anna of Denmark. And of course, dress and women in history are two of my favorite things. So this is it's pretty great for me. So the first thing I will say is that Anna of Denmark's journey from Denmark, Norway to Scotland is not unusual insofar as the movement of royal women is concerned, right? So we have to always think about the movement of royal women as being inherently political. So it's significant. Older scholarship used to often belittle the movement of royal women as being like they were pawns, you were pawns in the marriage market. Your father would broker a marriage match for you without your consent or involvement most of the time. And then you would move from your father's court to your husband's court. You're the property of your father, and then you're the property of your husband, right? But we, in the last, I'm going to say maybe 20 years, have become much more attuned to the politics of diplomacy that is wrapped into these marriage matches. And so the movement of a royal princess to become a royal queen, or I shouldn't probably have said queen because sometimes that's not strictly true, but to be a royal person moving between courts is a really important moment. And it's really important for the natal court. So that's the court they're originating from. That's the court of their birth. And it's a moment for that court to really showcase its wealth, to showcase its cultural capital, to showcase its dynastic capital. And they do this visually, right? So the royal woman would be often accompanied by a really large retinue or an entourage, and this can number hundreds of people. So for Anna of Denmark, I think that eyewitness accounts, if I'm remembering correctly, maybe said 230 people accompanied her. And that's not radical or wild or weird. This is, sort of par of the course. And so she will come with a whole host of people from her father's court. She will come with what we call a trousseau, which is basically a chest with multiple chests that includes clothing, hangings, oftentimes entire beds, cushions, carpets, soft furnishings, religious vestments and objects, silverware. I mean, you name it, it could definitely be there. Animals, horses, falcons, dogs, etc. And also carriages. Now, one thing that is interesting, before I just go back to the carriage. So as the bride moves and everything moves with her, it creates a visual spectacle. And it's a visual spectacle of their sort of their natal identity and their cultural capital and their financial wealth. So it's really important, and you see this with multiple times across the early modern period between the European courts, that this is a moment that people seize as a way of really demonstrating financial, political, military power, because those things are all sort of intertwined. So a carriage is not super unusual. It might seem kind of weird, but it's also a way of showcasing Danish ingenuity and the ability of having the resources and the know-how to craft really impressive objects. And so yeah, it came with her as a sign of like, hey, this is where I come from. This is what I've got. Look at me. It's a real spectacle, as I say.
Well, it's amazing that you were talking about that. That sounds very familiar to me because
Yes.
that's exactly where I started off too, in the marriage negotiations and the trousseau that was built for Catherine of Aragon, because it was built in Spain and it hadn't been analyzed because the Spanish sources hadn't been used, but it was all there, and to think that all those things went to England and stayed in England, and influenced the Tudor court and influence all types of what we call decorative arts, but also the other arts. Every type of aspect at court was influenced by the arrival of these women, especially when they are both, like I think Dr. Jemma said, when they're both have a strong capital in their in the where they come from, but also throughout their time as whatever they are, become princesses or queens. Their own cultural baggage that they bring makes them behave in a different way and assert their power through all these things that they've brought. Because they do belong to their husband, but they're still theirs, right? And this is where you see a lot of things like jewelry with symbols, or with dynastic symbols, or with initials. I'm thinking of an example of Gemma's book too, where Anna of Denmark wore a jewel that had belonged to Philip and Mary, right? That Philip had gifted to Mary Tudor. So all these things that they're all interconnected too. I mean, she's Anna of Denmark, but she has connections to England too, going back to Mary and Philip. So they're all connected, and they all showcase who is the coolest, who has the most power at the time, right? After reading the article and a lot of Dr. Gemma's work, it's just Anna is just a powerhouse. I can't say enough about how much I think but I think it's Gemma. Is it also, I think, because of her personality, right? Her own personality in England and in Scotland.
It is, and I also would say that it's about her relationship to James, so her husband, who's James VI of Scotland, who becomes James I of England when the childless Elizabeth I, who is his cousin, passes away, and the Stuarts sort of famously move from Edinburgh to London, and it becomes the Kingdom of Scotland. It's a personal composite monarchy, basically, that encompasses England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. And so you're right that it is about personality, in a way that everything always is, right? There is no two stories, even though we say that the general pattern is that the woman is the one that always moves. And, we've just been talking about sort of cultural capital and how that then stays and influences the marital court. But they're always different, and it is dependent partly on the proclivities of that individual royal woman. But it is also, I think, important to recognize that it is also down to their ability to negotiate their role within their new court. And part of that, and I've written about this quite extensively for Anna, because for a long time she was really denigrated as having had a hopeless marriage, James VI and first being much more interested in his male favorites than his wife, and therefore she was kind of irrelevant. A point that I really push back on, because it misses the reason for a royal marriage in the first place. So I'm just going to go on a slight tangent to kind of flesh that out for listeners and viewers. So the question of James's sexuality is really fraught and complicated. And it's complicated because the idea of what it meant to be a homosexual then and what it means now is very different. And it's difficult to figure out through the source material. For me personally, working on Anna of Denmark, it doesn't really matter whether he was or wasn't having sex with his male favorites, right? The point is that whether he was or wasn't didn't actually impact Anna's status at court because a male favorite can never replace her. The reason that James has married her and the reason that she has cachet at court is because of her ability to continue the dynasty, right? So she has to bear legitimate children, which she does.
She does.
She also, multiple times, which is fortunate because sadly many of their children die, and only 2 children outlive them. The pair of them, James and Anna, I mean, but they have 10 pregnancies altogether. The other reason that you make a marriage alliance is political. And as I mentioned in the first sort of podcast that I did with Rebecca, one of Anna's major strengths is that she comes from Denmark, Norway, and that through various familial and marital ties, she has a huge kinship network throughout Europe, most particularly throughout the German lands, through her siblings who have married, but also her grandparents. Denmark, Norway itself is a powerhouse at this time, which is something I want to say that we often don't give enough credit for, I think, because of our current geopolitical world that we live in, right? But Denmark, Norway in the 16th and 17th century is extremely rich and extremely powerful and important. And it's also, James's marriage to Anna enables him to become head of the Protestant League. Like, there's no coincidence there. And it's interesting too that the only time a formal treaty is negotiated between England and Denmark, Norway is on the death of Anna of Denmark, when James literally writes to her brother, Christian IV, to say basically, well, we've lost our link, so we should probably get something in writing. And he expressly says that. So the relationship that they have, I would say that it is slightly rocky. It's not a love story that one gets misty-eyed over. We do have amazing stories throughout history of royal couples who just seem to have a really amazing bond. That's not very apparent for James and Anna. However, it doesn't mean that she is diminished at court. She still maintains a really significant presence, and James defers to her in a lot of different ways throughout their time together in Scotland and England. So yeah, slight digression, but it is partly based on personality, and it's partly based on pedigree and the ability to be able to fulfill what was considered to be the primary duty of a royal woman. And the number one thing was to bear heirs, continue the line.
To bear and to educate, right? Because she has a big impact on her children. That's something I think we often forget. The father is who rules in that, but it's the mother usually who was more at home raising the kids, deciding all these things. And after reading your book, especially now going back to this article that is about this chapter, talking about the way she arrives to Scotland and those first years with the rest of her life, and something we have in common that we study, both of us, is the construction of the image of power. She has a very long trajectory and she changes her image many times. I love that about her. I think that's what shines through your work, that it's just, I'm thinking of this in Gemma's book, the cover, this portrait. I mean, it has some even we could say male elements to it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and not in this article. When she comes to Scotland, she has a very feminine style, right? But this is a different portrait. This is a portrait for her hunting lodge. So
yeah, and it's also much later. That's 1617, that portrait, 2 years before she dies. So she's had a long time, 13 years in Scotland. So it's been she does change over time. You're right.
And another thing that I was very surprised about your article, to reading it again, is how many of those very luxurious materials that she uses in her dress are from Spain.
Yes. So it's this is interesting to me on a number of levels, and continues is true of both England and Scotland, that the importance of luxury goods often overweighs any kind of political consideration. So, England has what should we say, a fractious relationship with Spain. It ebbs and flows. There are moments where it's really good, and there are moments where it is very rocky.
Yes.
But what is consistent is that Spain, as well as parts of the Italian city-states, that these are the places that produce the best goods. And I'm talking here about whether this is velvet, whether this is leather. I mean, Spain is renowned as being the best place to get leather-scented gloves, for example, and this is right throughout Anna's entire lifetime. But yeah, velvets, satins, silk, damasks, I mean, you name it, lace. I mean, these are things that are important. England is not, and Scotland even more so, is not a hub of local manufacture of these kind of luxury items. It has some, sure, but not in the way that we find on the European continent. So those goods continually flow in as imports.
It's just incredible.
I want to talk about her hair.
Oh, yeah.
And that was one of the things that I think surprised me a little bit, that hair would have such an importance in the image. Can you go into that a little bit more and maybe talk about the different styles and what they represent?
Sure. So my basic, when I was looking at sort of Anna's image, and this is where we find it on coins, we find it in print media, and we find it in painted portraits, both easel, so large scale, and also little miniatures that people would wear often on within jeweled lockets and things. So looking across that variety of media, you can see significant changes. And when I was originally working on this, I was kind of like, why? I mean, partly like the hair color changes. She does go from a reddish auburny color to a blonde in England. You also go from, and I'll just use my hands, so I apologize. I'll try and explain as well for those listening. But when the early portraits of her she almost has like a tall cone of hair that rises straight up from the ears and then forms like a little mound on top of her head. Much later, it then widens to the side and will be covered with often a jeweled headpiece of some sort. Ribbons as well, jewels as well. And this is a time period where you will often see this quite like a frizzed bouffant, we would call it. So it's very styled, it's often piled up high, and they would achieve this using padding. So you would have padded rolls over which your hair was then placed. It was often supplemented with false hair. So Anna's accounts include multiple entries for false spikes of hair, they're often referred to, as well as entire wigs of hair. So, and while it's often hard to tell when you're looking at the body of portraits, in which instance are you looking at real hair and when are you looking at false hair? It's pretty much, it's unclear. You can tell generally when it has been padded because it just is kind of marvelous in a way that you just know particularly as someone who's maybe tried to make one of these hairstyles yourself, that it's very difficult. Yes. So there's its aids, right? But essentially, when she comes to Scotland, you can see that the portraits that are made of her when she's in her Scottish period align quite closely with portraits that you find of her sisters and her sister-in-law. So there is a strong connection back to Denmark, Norway, and the northern Germanic lands, that there's a stylistic consistency there. Then you find when she moves to England in 1603 that it shifts. And my argument there is that it is actually much more closely aligned with what Elizabeth I, how she had been styling her hair just prior to her death, and what would have been considered normal, not remarkable, standard for English courtiers. And my argument there is about politics, right? That if you think about the movement from Denmark, Norway to Scotland, at that point, it's important for Anna to be signaling, as I was saying earlier, her cachet. She's the daughter of the Oldenburg dynasty. She comes from Denmark, Norway. She has ties to very important lands. I mean, least of all, electoral Saxony, which is a major powerhouse within the Holy Roman Empire. So she's championing her lineage through her look. However, when it comes to 1603, and I'm sure your listeners will know this very well, that when Elizabeth dies without having carved out a public plan for the succession, there is a lot of anxiety before she passes away, and there is a lot of anxiety before James arrives firmly on the throne. You know, we now think like slightly that it's not miraculous that it was peaceful and kind of smooth. But really it was. I mean, there were a number of contenders for the English throne. It was not a shoo-in that James would be the successor. And it was definitely not a given that people would just accept it, even when he got there. And there's been great work done on this by Sue Doran and others. But needless to say, the Stuarts themselves didn't ever take this as a thing that was destined to happen. James was angling for it, sure, for like decades, but he never was 100% sure that it was his. And so my argument about Anna is that by strategically sort of remaking herself in the English model, the English fashion, she's sort of calming fears. Because, of course, we have to remember that Scotland is not England. These are two completely different countries. These are completely different courts. These are different dynasties. There are different dialects. There are different languages. There are different fashions, different customs. You know, you name it, it's different. And so James was considered a foreigner, an outsider. And it was beneficial that he was of the Protestant persuasion, but he's not he's not Church of England. I mean, this is also true that we have to remember that Scotland is practicing a very different form of Protestantism than the English. So for a lot of English people then, James was just foreign in all ways, right? And so by having Anna of Denmark make herself over as being as looking English, this was, I argue, would have helped quell some of those fears that, like, don't worry, we're not super foreign. We're pretty much like you. We're very similar. You know, it's kind of going to be okay. Because if you look at the movement of other royal women into England, Catherine of Aragon, I'll say to you, Emma, people were shocked. You know, people wrote horrible, I mean, basically racist things about her and her women because they looked, you know, monstrous is the word that was often thrown around because they looked so different and foreign. And the fear was always that as a foreigner, that meant you weren't going to be in support of the structures of the English government, country, dynasty, right? You were going to be allied to some foreign power and been doing stuff on their behalf and subjugating the English. And so I think when we look at Anna's sort of transformations in terms of hairstyle, it's also true that she undergoes transformations in terms of dress, which annoyingly, which is classic of wardrobe accounts, we don't know exactly what the fashion change was, but you have accounts before she leaves for England in 1603 of her Scottish tailors making up a whole host of new gowns for her, and they're called being made in the, quote, new fashion. The only thing we know is that this required a significant amount of fabric, more than what was required for her other gowns. And my speculation, my informed speculation, maybe I should say, is that it's going from a round gown, which is more akin to the Spanish farthingale look, where it's kind of more of a cone shape, tied at the waist and going down to the floor as a triangle, to what we see with the French farthingale or the drum-shaped farthingale, where you have your circular, you sort of have a circle stitched around your waist from which your skirts fall directly to the floor. And this type of dress does require significant amounts of fabric to create. So, and I mean, the other thing I will put into, sorry, and I just go off on these tangents now because I start remembering and thinking about all these things. But one more point about this idea of moving from Scotland to England that I think is very telling and very strategic is that James makes a concerted effort to showcase both Stuart and Tudor dynastic symbols and colours as that cavalcade moves through the countryside. So you get the Tudor colours are green and white, the Stuart colours are red and yellow, so you have a mixture of both. He makes sure that Tudor roses are everywhere to be seen alongside Scottish thistles. You know, so I feel that there is a very considered approach to what it's going to look like when the royal family moves down through the countryside. And of course, he's already gone. He's gone to London. He's already shipping stuff back to the family to make sure that they arrive in what he considers to be the level of majesty that is requisite to the Queen of England. So he sends jewels, clothes, shoes, all these things, lengths of fabric back to Scotland to make sure that Anna, Prince Henry, and Princess Elizabeth, who come together in one group first, that they look the part, that they look regal enough, splendid enough, and I would argue English enough to be the next royal family ruling the kingdom.
Marketing, right?
Yes. I mean, we've been doing it. One of the things that I find, which I kind of love about this, is my mum is always quite upset by how focused on consumption and appearances, superficiality that we all are in this day and age. And I have to just say to her, you know what? We've always been like this. Humanity has always spent significant amount of money and time on appearances, and they matter. They're a thing that we read and interpret about people all the time.
Yeah.
Even if we might not like that, it's often very
Speaking of
true.
that, it's funny that you just mentioned that because I was just thinking about the portraits of
Mm.
Anna. And in your chapter, there's one by Nicholas Hilliard that I think shows a view of Anna that's so soft and so like delicate. I don't know how else to describe it, but I'm curious, how did she use portraits and paintings to send messages with her clothing?
This is a very good question.
I love
I'm
this
gonna,
question.
I'm going to answer this. I'm going to answer this in two ways. First, I'm going to talk about portraits just in general in terms of circulation and the politics of portraits. So Anna is very aware and canny about the power that can come with portraiture. She consistently, and this is more, we have better evidence for this in England, unfortunately, than we do for the Scottish period. So I'm going to sort of focus more heavily on that. It's true that there is some evidence in Scotland, but it's much thinner than what we have in England. And this is evidence that pertains to her patronage. And this is one of the areas where we can, the concept of patronage is kind of fraught when you get into gender politics. Because the traditional model of patronage is that the person that pays for the thing is the patron. Now, when you're talking about women, oftentimes the person holding the purse strings is the husband or it's the father. But generally for my research, it's the husband, right? Now, Roger Crumb actually is one of the most influential scholars I've read on this, who really changed my way of thinking about patronage because, and I think he's totally right in this, arguing for the power of the recipient. So, for example, let's say Anna is going to have a portrait, and the only thing that comes down to us in the records is that James paid for a portrait of Anna by Nicholas Hilliard. Let's just use that example. Now, the traditional scholarship would say that James is the patron, Hilliard is the artist, and Anna is the recipient. Now, within that, there are multiple ways that this could have fallen out. Anna could have had absolutely nothing to do with it other than be given the portrait at the end of the day, right? James could have had either done it himself personally or through a proxy, engaged Hilliard in the commission, specified how he wanted it to look, paid Hilliard on completion, and then given the portrait to Anna. It's true too that he could have just said, I want a portrait and paid Hilliard the money and had nothing, no directorial engagement with it. But it's also quite possible that given that Anna would be the recipient at the end of the day, that she would have had something to say about how she was going to look, right? Even if it was third party, as in James talking with Anna and then James talking with Hilliard, and Anna never directly conversing with Hilliard in any way, because she didn't have to sit for it either, right? There'd be a face pattern that he could use, etc. You still don't want to have a portrait that the person in it doesn't like, right? Like she has to tacitly agree in some way, shape, or form. And we do have evidence where it is that the female sitter is very engaged in choosing the clothes that they're going to wear, in choosing how big the portrait is, in choosing how much of their body is going to be shown, talking about their jewelry, any other accoutrements, whether there's going to be a dog in the portrait, is there going to be a motto, is there a symbol, all these kinds of things. And also there's the added complication of whether the portrait is of Anna and then given to someone else. Right? So there are these complicating factors. And the general kind of the way I think about the politics of portraiture is that you're tying people to you, but you're also expressing something about yourself. And whether that's going to hang in your own palace and people that you invite in are going to see it, or whether you're going to give that to someone, let's say you give it to, I don't know, the
Spanish ambassador.
Okay, you give it to the Spanish ambassador. And for a while, it's going to be in his London residence, wherever he's being housed, maybe at Essex House or wherever. He might well ship it back to, say, Philip III, or he might take it with him, or there are multiple ways that this can play out. But essentially, a portrait, I would say, is almost always political because it says something specific about the person, and it also points to some kind of connection or network, whether that's a kinship tie, whether that's a statement of political allegiance, whether it's demonstrating favor or support at a particular moment, right? This is a way of signposting that you are in support or favor or connected to the person who is in the portrait. And Anna was pretty canny at doing this. So when she first arrives in England, she engages Isaac Oliver as her miniaturist. Yeah. And as I was saying about the patronage model, what is quite nice about England, the English records that we have, is that oftentimes we can see her directly engaging artists and directly paying them out of her privy purse accounts. So that's her like private stream of income. There are also occasions where they go through the centralized exchequer. You find them in the king's accounts, and that's all great. That's all building the picture of what we know about the patronage of portraiture in that time period. But we do have instances where you can definitively say that Anna is the one who is engaging, paying, and having a relationship with these artisans. So on her first arrival, she, as I say, engages Isaac Oliver, who I'm sure many of your listeners know about. I'm going to say, quite famous. I'm looking at you two to be like, right?
Yes,
about him? Yeah. Okay. the younger of the two. Nicholas Hilliard's the other one that you mentioned, yes. Rebecca, who's also a miniaturist that's also famed. So Anna engages him, and basically he starts painting her from the get-go. So the first progress that she does in the summer of 1603, he's then paid in 1604, and I think from memory, I think it's something like £200, which is a huge amount of money.
It's a lot of money.
So, yes, a miniature is probably maybe £10.
Yeah.
I'm going to say. So it's a lot of work that he's doing.
Yeah.
And we don't sadly have all of the details of like how many portraits he painted and where these went, but you can infer that they're going to have been gifts. So you can imagine, I think, without too much sort of stretching of history, that he is painting miniatures of Anna, either with having, from visual memory, right? Because he's in her retinue, he's going around with her, or from she would have done one proper sitting from which he would have made a face pattern that he could have reused, or he's doing it from verbal testimony in terms of updates to either dress or hairstyle or whatever. Then those little miniatures are being given out to people. So they're tokens of affection. But the thing about gift giving is there's always a slight underlying tone of reciprocity, right? So that the person who gets the miniature is now slightly beholden to the monarch because they've received a gift, they're very grateful, they feel in favor. And whether the Queen Anna is looking just to secure loyalty or affection, which I would argue is probably extremely key at this moment in time, thinking that they've just come to England and they're trying to like ingratiate themselves with the people. That's quite possible, but you can also use portraits for other purposes, like securing or celebrating a treaty, for example, or the example that you gave, Emma, about the Spanish ambassador, if Anna of Denmark had given the Spanish ambassador a portrait of herself and he put it in Essex House, anyone who then comes to the residence while he's in London is going to see that portrait and know that he's, in with the Queen, as it were. So this is sort of one of the ways I think that you can use, or she did, use portraiture for political ends.
I agree with you. It's incredible because I mentioned the Spanish ambassador because I found examples how I think in the case of the miniatures, it's just a tradition that is a tradition for queens in England since Catherine of Aragon, who introduces miniature portrait with the harem boots. Maybe we could talk about this some other episode. I'll get all entangled in that because Jemma and I will be working with her later this year at the Yale Center for British Art on this specific topic. So let's not get sidetracked.
Yes.
Next episode about her, but it is a long tradition.
Yes.
Elizabeth has made a big deal of it, Elizabeth the First, I think. It might be part of the same politics of continuation, really. And Oliver also copies older miniatures, right? And she's like expanding this. And I know she owns at least one miniature of Isabel Clara Eugenia, Philip II's daughter, who she has a close connection to. And I love that in your book, you even tell a little anecdote about how in 1615, I always get it wrong because I'm a 16th century student, sorry.
Yes.
I'm sure it happens to
I know
you
this,
too.
it does. It happens to me often, even in my own life, where I go to say,
I was born in 1584. What?
yes, exactly. And I'm like, oh, hang on a minute.
I was
sorry,
actually.
no.
No. But you mentioned that she had a picture, she had her jeweler mend this picture several times, and then she valued it so much that during a hunt, she lost it. And much of Jane's, and she had everyone look for it until they recovered it, right?
Yep.
So this is how much these miniatures of people were valued.
Absolutely. And I think miniatures, to my mind, I mean, this is probably just a personal bias, but to me, they have an added value that is both personal and political over an easel painting because of their proximity to the body and their ability to be revealed and concealed.
Yes.
Which gives them this this kind of added power that I think is much harder to replicate with an easel portrait. But of course, if you're consistently wearing a jewel, and this is a fabulous example, and I terribly say Isabella Clara Eugenia, so I'm sorry.
She's got a difficult name. She's got a difficult name.
But the way you pronounce it sounds so much better. But the fact that she wears that often, right? And George Heriot, her jeweler, as you mentioned, is billed for fixing it, along with the miniature of her brother, Christian IV. This suggests to me consistent wear. And the idea that you consistently on your body showcase someone else's face means for people who come into contact with you or who see your body replicated in portraits, along with those miniatures, they become almost part of your visual identity, right?
Exactly.
That when you see a portrait, and this actually, I just remembered, Rebecca, that I didn't actually answer the second part of your question, which is about the role of the clothing and the body in the portrait.
That was me getting excited, chiming in, sorry.
This is the point, right? That Anna consistently, what I call her visual persona, so the way she looks in visual media, like, as I say, coins, prints, paintings, etc., medals, that she becomes indelibly associated with some of these objects, both the miniature and also these jeweled ciphers, these letters, so that more consistently than I was able to trace for any other English royal person, that this is really part of the way she is portrayed, the way she is seen. And she will have had a role in that, as I mentioned. There is definitely an argument to be made that royal women have agency over the way they are seen in print and paint. So when one thinks about this is going to be slightly meta, a miniature of Anna of Denmark who is wearing a miniature in the miniature, right?
A picture in the picture, yes.
Yeah, a picture in the picture, that the person who receives the miniature or who looks on it is going to be making the connection between, say, Anna of Denmark and Christian IV of Denmark, or Anna of Denmark and Isabel Clara Eugenia, because she has consistently worn that on her body in real life.
Yeah.
So this is how that politics kind of works, so that you're signposting within your body of portraiture your connections. And this is true too of the cipher jewelry. So she consistently wears either a C4 for Christian IV, or she wears an S for her mother, Sophia of Mecklenburg-Güstrow, right? So every time you see the portrait, so we know for a fact that she did own jeweled letters of her mother and brother, and she owned multiple as well, I will say. So this isn't just a one-off. This is like a consistent feature. And interestingly too, just to add another layer of interest or complication, depending on how you look at it, Christian IV also gifted his other sisters and his wife jewelry that included his monogram of the C4. So we know too that we have portraits that survive of his wife wearing C4 jewelry. And we know we have one extant example, a beautiful bracelet that still has the enameled C4 all around the links. So there is, so my point here is that that is a live symbol that is being worn at multiple courts at the same time to really showcase visually this dynastic connection.
That's incredible. In the case of Isabel Clara Eugenia,
Yeah.
it's you need to
Yeah,
practice
which
more.
I don't think
Like
I
you
can.
have something
I
in your
get it.
throat, you can't really. And I hear it, and I hear it when I say it. But in the case of her mother, Isabel of Valois, is portrayed by Sophonis Vanguisola at least once, holding a miniature of Philip II.
Yes,
And
I
this
know
is a
that
whole
portrait.
thing. Yes,
Yes,
it's in the Prado
yes.
Museum.
I love it.
Surprise,
Yep.
surprise. I'm talking about the Prado again. But
Yep.
yes, and this is something I just came from Spain from our conference at the Art, Power, and Gender group. And we were talking about this as a way of these women to legitimize and to showcase what is Anna is giving to me is I've got international power. I'm showcasing this. What is really surprising, all the examples I found and we talked about at the conference, except for one, were men. In this case, is Isabel Clara Eugenia, because Isabel Clara Eugenia is the co-ruler of the Netherlands. So
yeah, of course.
for some time. So I think it's more about a ruler, even if it's a woman like Isabel Clara Eugenia, who has a lot of influence in this time. And I think this is just fascinating to see that Anna there is having that exchange with her. Another thing that I thought was really interesting reading about the portrait exchanges between them, when James receives the Spanish ambassador for the Treaty of Peace, he gives the Spanish ambassador a portrait of Anna and a portrait of his son, not a portrait of him. So he
Yes,
knows
that's
where his
true.
capital is.
Yep.
He knows where his capital is. It's in his wife,
Yep.
and it's in his heir. And then
Yeah.
he eventually sends a portrait of himself that is now in the Prado of by John de Crete. So I mean, it's just it's and they seem to me very European in these new portraits for the Spanish piece, whereas this portrait that you showed us in the article in Scotland seems a bit more. You said the fashion is from the north, but adapted to. So it's just so complex how they want to showcase themselves as Europeans, maybe in these new portraits when they arrive to England, right? It's to send to
Yes.
Spain, a place which
And
is
I
very
think-
European in that sense, in portraiture at
Yeah,
least.
absolutely. And I think the European piece is key because I think for a long time, scholars of England or Scotland or the composite monarchy, they're looking at the Stuart period, studied it in relative isolation. By
Right.
which I mean, it's not that Europe is completely missing, but I think it's not as integral. It's not made as integral as it actually was in the period. The flow of people, products, portraits between the European courts and that of England and Scotland is constant. And this is always a dialogue, right? So there is a constant flow, ebb and flow all the time. This isn't places that are sitting in isolation, just thinking about themselves and what they're going to do, right? This is an interconnected world at this point already.
I think that's what your work does with Anna. Like she's a diplomatic agent that uses fashion and all these kind of really tools that they have visually, because a woman does have to remain more silent, a queen consort, than a king does. So the visual culture of Anna of Denmark, and I'll go again to this portrait of Paul van Sommel is his name, of Anna. This is just magnificent because her palace is included in it, right? So she's showcasing her wealth, her patronage. She's incredible.
And that portrait's interesting. So it's 1617. It is by Paul van Sommer, as you say. It depicts Oatlands and the vineyard that she had constructed there, and it was then hung during her lifetime at Oatlands. So there's an interesting sort of
Speaking of marketing mothers, here's me.
Yes. Here's my place that I own. And one thing that I sort of argue throughout the book is Anna's, and I mentioned this too actually when we were talking, Rebecca, her unbridled sense of ownership over her properties, which extended to the surrounding sort of lands and tenements, whatever those were. But that it's also key for us to remember for royal women that part of, usually it's at the time of marriage, but for Anna of Denmark, actually James adds onto this throughout her entire life, is her jointure, which is basically a set of estates that are gifted to her in terms of these properties will produce revenue and that revenue is yours. So it's how they fund the so-called privy purse of an individual, like a consort, right? Now, what's interesting about Anna in England, and I can't, the facts are, the stats are in the book, but James just adds properties on and on to Anna's jointure over the years. So it just grows.
Oh.
It just gets more and more. Now, partly I argue that that is because of expenditure. The woman knows how to spend money, which is in itself is politics. But also, I think, too, points to her consistently high standing with James. Like, he doesn't have to do this. And it's, again, part of this relationship and what you were just saying, Emma, about her cachet. Like, she is important to him. She is his prime conduit to Europe, right? So she just comes with a value that is unmatched. And I think this is one of the ways that you can see his consistent sort of respect for that, right? Like there is no reason that he has to give her Greenwich when he does, which is, and I can't remember the date, but it's much later. It's not when they arrive in England, for example, in 1603. It's much later down the track, maybe 1611. So properties just keep added on, but Anna really takes her properties very seriously. And so she will happily enter into any dispute with any man at court, should they potentially give cause for ownership contention. Yeah.
Jemma, I love it when you come on the show and talk about Anna of Denmark, because I feel like I say this every time.
We need more. Now
Yes.
I want to know everything about Oatlands.
Yes. Yes. Right. And Greenwich is the same. I mean, these are, and the other thing too, actually, just to re-underscore, is that even a word? To underline the Europeanness of Anna of Denmark.
I love that part.
That a consistent through line is her upbringing, that her experiences on the continent in Denmark, Norway, really shape almost, I would say, all of her patronage activities throughout her entire life. And one of the key examples that I think people should maybe will find interesting, and one that I think we should slightly rethink, is Inigo Jones and the Queen's House at Greenwich. Right. And this is difficult because, of course, it's not completed during her lifetime. It's actually completed for Henrietta Maria, who succeeds her as Queen Consort when she marries Anna of Denmark's only surviving son, Charles. But the plans for that property are firmly made by Anna of Denmark. And when she engages Jones as the so-called accountant, which really is what we would call an architect, she rejects his first pass at what he's going to make for her. So she pays him £10, but she makes him do it again. And he has to submit a second model, which she gets £16 for, and then that one's approved. Now, that to me is clear evidence of someone who has an idea about what they're wanting and is then making the person who they're engaging to do the project really meet their demands. And when you look at what Jones then manages to complete, I mean, and sadly, as I say, by the time she passes away in 1619, all that has really been done is the digging of the foundations and laying some of the basic sort of stone outlines. That the way that house makes the best sense is by looking back to her father, Frederick II, and how he engaged and used his hunting lodges, which he used as sites of diplomacy and oftentimes ceremonial, as well as using them as places of private retreat. They were also part of the hunt, which in Denmark, Norway was extremely politicized. They would have what was called a great hunt, where you would have, massive amounts of courtiers, nobles following the king on this hunt that would last for days and go throughout the kingdom. We have written accounts that Anna did go on one of these hunts with her father. She was, of course, famed as a very proficient and, the word's not excited, proficient and enthusiastic huntress throughout her life. And that when you look at the Queen's House, this is how that place was intended. It was able to look onto the Thames to see ships that were coming in, bringing in, say, the ambassador of Spain, for example. She would be able to see that from Gravesend,
Of course.
from the balcony, right? So that's a key point of ceremonial. There was rooms in there that could be used for state engagements and entertainments. It also was a hunting lodge, ostensibly, right, where you could watch the hunt. If you were actively engaging in it, you could still see it. But it was also a place that could be used for private, I say private in little rabbit marks, right?
Yeah.
Because royal women are never like actually in solitude,
Yeah.
but relative
Yeah.
privacy, say to like Whitehall. So, or the Palace of Greenwich itself, right? This is a subsidiary building, smaller building. So she's combining the way that those lodges worked in Denmark, Norway, and she's sort of like implanting that in a way into England. So if you put that kind of thinking into it, rather than seeing it as the product of Jones's, and I'm not trying to denigrate Inigo Jones in any way. Of course, he was an amazing mastermind, incredible mind, and designed some astonishing buildings throughout England. But rather than seeing the Queen's House as the sole product of his genius, having been through Europe and having been able to see Friedman de Vries, having, imbibed these architectural orders through books and personal travels, is to also think about the patron, in this case, Anna of Denmark, and what she was wanting and what she had had personal experience with. Of which we should also remember too that Inigo Jones has personal first-hand experience of Denmark, Norway, having travelled there with the Earl of Rutland's retinue to give Christian IV the Order of the Garter. So this is, one could also conceivably think about the two of them talking about the same places and spaces. Maybe that's a bit far-fetched, but I would like to put Anna of Denmark slightly back in there as not just a passive recipient of what Inigo Jones thought he might like to do at Greenwich, but actually to have a dialogue with the patron and artisan coming together to craft something.
Dr. Jemma Field from the Yale Center for British Art. I'm so I love having you on the show, and I love
thank you so much for having me.
Before we go, I need to put Jemma on the spot here. Jemma, after you said all of this, I need to say you need to come back. We need to talk about Anna and her art collection and Oatlands, Inigo Jones. I always call him Inigo because anyway, Inigo Jones and his involvement also in Oatlands, right? I'm really interested.
Yes. I mean, the gatehouse, if you hold up the book again, the front, you'll see that behind her in that portrait, there's a little, it's impossible.
Oh, it's here.
I've cropped it off.
Yes, it's right here.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have read it. Yeah, it's right here. That's his project, right?
Yes, he did that. And so there are accounts, the accounts survive proving that he did that, and his drawings survive for it too, and then it's replicated in that painting. And too, Somerset House is another example, actually, I will just say in case people are like, she's crazy. What do you mean Inigo Jones isn't the sole person responsible for Greenwich Queen's House? Yeah. But if you look at Simon Thurley's work on Somerset House, similar arguments are made there about Anna, and this predates the Queen's House. And he talks about it as one of the biggest sort of architectural achievements of the Stuart period. And of course, Anna of Denmark is the person that is paying for most of that and engaging these artisans. So it doesn't come out of nowhere. So what I'm saying is, essentially, she's always had this interest in architectural spaces, whether that's the built environment, so by which I mean both the house and its surrounding lands, the tenements, the whole thing, basically. This is a through line that you see throughout her life. It doesn't just arrive out of nowhere with the Queen's House. It is a consistent thing that you can track throughout her patronage.
So I think she said, she'll be back to talk about that. And the art displayed there, because I need to ask you about, our works still in the Royal Collection, like works by Rubens that were displayed there in Oatlands and that she might have commissioned. And this has a lot to do with the Spanish queens and their love for hunting and their ways to display their wealth and power in these hunting places that become diplomatic havens.
Absolutely.
So,
I'd love that.
Yeah, I would say yes.
I look forward to that episode. And before we go, Dr. Jemma, I want you to have the opportunity to plug the Yale Center for British Art.
Yes. Oh, yes. Well, I'm very delighted to say that the Yale Center for British Art has reopened its doors to the public as of Saturday, just gone, although we're recording this on Thursday, April 3rd. Now, is it maybe we opened on March the 29th. So after 2 years, we were closed for renovations. We have if anyone has been, our building is very important to us. It was designed by Louis Kahn, and sometimes it needs a little bit of magic help. So it doesn't look different. It's just been slightly restored. So we changed all the skylights. We also made a decision to become more environmentally friendly, and we moved from halogen lights to LED lights throughout the entire museum. So things won't look different, but we're back, we're open. We have our permanent collection has been reimagined and reinstalled. And we also currently have 2 special exhibitions, one on J.M.W. Turner in celebration of his 250th, and then the other one about Tracy Emin, who's a contemporary British artist. So yes, come to we are free and open to all. So yes, please do come by.
Yeah, Dr. Jemma, thank you so much for coming on, and until next time.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye.
And that concludes another episode of the Tudors Dynasty podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you love the show and would like to show your support, consider becoming a patron over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty. Over there, you'll get commercial-free episodes, early access, and some patron exclusive content as well. If you would prefer to show your support in another way, head on over to my website, tudorsdynasty.com, and click on the shop to see some of the new merchandise that I have available. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.